So good evening and welcome everyone. It is wonderful to see so many people online on Zoom, also joining us on social media, and particularly delighted to have with us this evening Fleur, Hassan and Nahoum and David Barr, who I'll introduce very, very shortly. Let me just take the opportunity to thank everybody who participated in this afternoon's rally outside the Israeli embassy. And I'd like to thank everyone for their cooperation with all the instructions from the police and the CST, also for the police and the CST for managing an incredibly good-natured rally, if I can use that expression, contrasting with the pictures that we had seen of the demonstrations against Israel. We were treated to Divrei Torah, words of chizuk, songs of Israel, and a truly positive feeling, which jars just a little with the climate of fear which inspired the rally, not only for everything that was going on in Israel, but the way that it had spilled over into our local community. The climate of fear has been exacerbated by coverage of the recent conflict that has yet again portrayed Israel as the villain of the piece. But let us remember that over 4,000 missiles were fired from Gaza. But if you listen to the media, that was always concluded with, but we had the Iron Dome, and there were a disproportionate number of Gazan casualties, as if for some reason we were to be blamed for defending our citizens too well. Should we have let more rockets through in order to even it up a bit? The other thing that has been so very much in the news is the idea of war crimes, and with the terrible death toll of civilians and children. And clearly every single innocent life lost is the most terrible tragedy for families and for the innocent and for hope for the future. But when we reflect on war crimes, the use of human shields is forbidden by the Geneva Conventions. The Rome Statute of 1998 says directly, utilizing the presence of a civilian or other protected person to render certain points, areas, or military forces immune from military operations is a war crime. So the fact that the weapons are stockpiled and launched from civilian areas, stockpiled and infiltrated through tunnels under civilian areas, those are war crimes. And our community, our families, have the terrible, awesome responsibility of having to defend themselves against these war criminals. This evening, we're going to hear from David Barr and Fleur, Hassan, Nahoum, and I'd like to particularly thank the ZF for their partnership, but most particularly Shimon Gillis for setting up this evening's program. David Barr, who we're going to hear from in just a moment, is Shimon's uncle. And so welcome to you and welcome to all the Gillis family around the world with your different names who are participating in this. And if I can plug Shimon, what a remarkable and wonderful servant he is of Kinloss and the community as a whole. So now that we've got that out of the way, but it was very important to say it. David is originally from Leeds. He was a member of B'nai Akiva and is now a member of the B'nai Akiva UK Kibbutz Alumim. He's been there for over 30 years. Now, if I can just share a screen with you, let me share Google Earth. You should be able to see a familiar shape of Israel. There's Tiberia down to the Dead Sea. There's Jericho. There's Yerushalayim. If we come down to Gaza, right, now keep your eye on this little bit there as I zoom in. Not there yet, not there yet, not there yet. There we are. That is Alumim, just there. So not far from the Gaza border at all. So that's where David is right now. There he is a teacher of Tanakh, Jewish philosophy at the Ad Mordechai High School. He is an inspector of the area around Gaza and Ashkelon for the teaching of Jewish culture and philosophy. He is a strong follower of Leeds United, also Rabbi Sachs. He was an ex-shaliach for JFS, and he is in Israel with his 4 children, Asaf, Gal, Shiran, and Omer, all of whom have served in elite IDF units. David, good evening to you. Can you tell us just a little bit about what's going on in Alumim and around that area and how it's been for the last 10, 12 days?
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much for a very pleasant introduction. Good evening. Tov lekulam. The hardest part of the last 2 weeks was actually when Shimon asked me to say a few words and get it all in within 6 to 7 minutes. So I'll do my best. This wasn't a surprise. The war wasn't a surprise. Since the last war, Sukeitan, it's been ready. You can feel it in the air. We've never had, you can say, a year of sheket, a year of where we can say where anything has gone towards peace. What I try to do is to say from my point of view, what we call in Hebrew ma'galei shayachut, different areas or spheres of life, the way I see things, because this war is not only about Gaza and it's not only about Alumim and not Otef Aza, it's about the whole of Israel and even wider. For the last 2 to 3 weeks, coming home from school every day was through burning fields. Balloons, which are supposed to be such a lovely thing for children to look at, have become frightening. You can see young children aged 3, 4 already know, you see a balloon, you keep away from it. And sometimes, I would have gone into Tel Aviv or other areas in Israel and I see a balloon and I have to think twice. Is this a dangerous balloon or is it a balloon for celebration? It affects us. And the fields were being burned and nobody could do anything. And it sounds strange to say kites and balloons were totally uprooting our agricultural way of life. We're an agricultural kibbutz. We don't have any industry, and fields were burning away, and very little could really be done. In addition to that, we felt on the borders there were always Gazans who were disrupting nightlife. Even they have what's called a system which made us feel that there was a red alert. So they were setting it off and we were never quite sure what was going on. They're quite sophisticated. Once war broke out, I'm not going to tell you things which you all know. Once Jerusalem was targeted after political problems. I don't want to go into the politics here. I just want to say the way I see things. Both myself and Ilana, my wife, made a decision that we're not leaving Alumim. We don't have any children at home, and that makes a big difference. But we did not want to feel like refugees in our own country. That was the last thing we wanted to feel, and we decided to stay. It wasn't easy. There were times the intensity of this war was different from any other war that we've had before. The amount of bombs which were dropped or rockets which were dropped within per hour were much greater than we've had before. But we're thankful to the Israeli government that we have a mamad, that we have a shelter, that we could go in and we felt safe there. If the same shelter will be safe for the next war, I have my doubts. The bombs are getting stronger and the intensity of the wars are getting harder. If I wouldn't be exaggerating if I told you there were 3-4 hours, maybe 5 hours a day, we just could not stick our nose out of the door. We had to stay in. We had to face drones, which coming over, sort of controlled by somebody on the other side of the border, with missiles on the end, which we had to stay within the bomb-proof room for 4 to 5 hours. It really wasn't pleasant. Our border, our fields are actually right up to the Gazan border. We've given up part of them as a kibbutz for the army to survey the entrance from Gaza to Israel. And all the agricultural work over 2 weeks, which is a huge amount of work, just stopped, collapsed. We have hot houses there. Everything just is ruined because you don't pick, it gets ruined. So that's one point of view, actually being in the kibbutz during that time. The kibbutz life, well, I don't blame any family, and most families with children, I wouldn't say they left, they had to leave. You could not stay here with children. And that was very sad to see. But on the other hand, we saw an incredible amount of generosity and closeness and unity with northern communities inviting us, sending us down fruit and sending cakes to those who stayed and taking in those who had decided to leave Alumim and the other kibbutzim in the area. And that's really, I can say, as far as myself and my wife were concerned, we stayed here the 2 weeks, and that sudden switch off Thursday night is also difficult to deal with because your adrenaline is running the whole time, and suddenly it's switched off and straight back to normal life. Well, what is normal around this area? The next area which I'd like to talk about is the whole area of Otef Aza, the whole area which goes around Gaza. It cleared out. It all cleared out. You have places which were left with 5, 6 families, again with no children. But I'd like to see there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You know, this area does not have one spare house, and we're setting up a new community. Nobody's going to push us out of here. The people here are strong and not prepared to give up, however difficult it seems on the other side. But unfortunately, Otef Aza will now be Ashkelon. It'll be Ashdod. That's the new Sderot. And those areas have yet not got bomb shelters, and the people there suffered terribly. So it's not just going to be us. This is going in towards Ashkelon, Ashdod, and well, we all know that Tel Aviv and even further north was hit. The next area is Gaza. Gazans' life mattered to us. But dealing with a terrorist organization that takes control there, the whole world knows. It may not want to say, it may not want to admit it, but every penny that's gone in there does not go towards the Gazan people, it goes towards the fight against Israel, and nothing but. Just look how much cement goes into the hundreds of miles or kilometers of tunnels, of warfare, of making their own missiles. The Israeli army in their attacks, I'm not going to, I'm speaking here, I assume, to the people who realize, were the most moral army in trying to pinpoint every attack without hitting the population who are not part of this. How much they are or not, I don't know, because their generations are growing under Gaza, under the Hamas education system. And we know once children are educated to hate, it's very difficult to change. And the next part of this war, which is very difficult, is the next circle, I call it, is the Israeli Arabs. For many people, I teach in a totally non-religious, I would call it a left-wing school. This was just a total crisis. It was as if their world had fallen apart, that coexistence with the Arabs had failed. Now, there was people who called it symmetria. There was this side of the argument and that side of the argument, but there was no symmetry in this. 10 Batei Knesset were burnt, no mosques were burnt. 112 Jewish homes were burnt or broken into. I'm reading from the newspaper here. 112 houses. One Arab house was hit and burnt. 386 Jewish businesses were ruined. No Arab businesses were ruined. 849 Jewish cars were burnt. 13 Arab cars were burnt. There's no symmetry. This was an Arab uprising from within. I have no answers. I also believe in coexistence. I don't believe in what you call in England a total merging of the two cultures, but just to live side by side. And this is, in my opinion, the worst part of all this, of all the trouble that we've been through the last 2 weeks. This is going to be the hardest thing to repair, if we can do at all. We don't know where the Arabs stand. We really don't. I think the last ring around this is not actually in Israel. I think it's what we've seen growing in Chutz La'aretz, and I call it the Jewish world or the diaspora, where you're sitting at the moment. And that worries me, a lot more than me sitting here in Gaza, nor next to Gaza. The rise of anti-Semitism, cloaked in anti-Zionism, sits, well, I don't want to say, does it send me back 80 years? Is the writing on the wall? Can we ever get rid of it? The hatred for Jews, beating up of Jews in America, in England, in France. And what's very interesting is watching that many leaders of countries are against it, but the populations, I assume that they are very much influenced by the rise of extreme Islam, is causing this wave of anti-Semitism, which I think is also controlled or well used by social networking. And I want to give one word to this now. It was Goodman who quoted film star, I've forgotten his name, who said, God forbid Goebbels would have had the use of Facebook or Instagram. But unfortunately, anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish, it's all the same really, are exactly the same. And how does it work? It preaches to you what you want to hear. You can't win on social network. You can't beat it. You have to be there, but you can't beat it. You're not going to, all these things that you see around and sent around and messages, you're not going to persuade anyone to think the way you think, because it doesn't work like that. We are all little robots. And unfortunately, I feel that the social networks now are becoming the greatest tool of the Hamas, of Iran, of the rise of Islamic extremists against the Jewish world, against our existence. It may be as a people as a whole, and it may be against the state of Israel. Lights, or what you would say at the end of the tunnel, well, Yigal Yoshua, who was killed lynched in Lod at the age of 56, only 2 weeks ago. Well, his wife donated the organs of his body, and one went to the kidney of an Arab lady who, Bizchuto, is alive today. There is hope. There always has to be hope. And with everything, I'd never give up living here. I'd never go back. With all the trouble, it may seem from a long way off, but I'll go back to myself and my wife, Ilana, at the center of all this, from this point of view, and say, it's fantastic to be part of maybe the greatest chapter in Jewish history for over 2,000 years. It may be difficult, it may be hard, but being part of it gives a real meaning to life. And maybe sometimes we feel we're failing, some of those ups and downs, but I believe we have what's called, in the words of Arav Soloveitchik, shituf goral. We all care about each other all around the world. Something happens to a Jew in America, it hurts me here. Something happens to me here, it hurts you there. But I really do believe that this is the greatest chapter in Jewish history for over 2,000 years, and I welcome everybody to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, and words which were heartfelt, well thought out, aspirational. Our thoughts and prayers are very much with you, your family, and community. If people have got questions, please do post them in the chat for both David and for Fleur. Fleur Hassan Nahoum is a name to watch. She was born in London, grew up in Gibraltar, is the daughter of Sir Joshua Abraham Hassan, who was Chief Minister and Mayor of Gibraltar. In 1991, at the age of 18, she moved back to London to study law at King's College London. She served as president of the King's College Jewish Society and then qualified as a barrister practicing law in Middle Temple, and at the same time became campaign director of World Jewish Relief. Fleur is a religious Zionist, made Aliyah in 2001. Since over the last 20 years or so, she's been a member of the Yerushalayim Party, which seeks to turn Yerushalayim into a more pluralistic and open city. Since 2016, she's been on the Jerusalem City Council, heading transportation and conservation of heritage sites. In 2020, she was one of the founding members of the UAE Israel Business Council, which was established following the Abraham Accords peace treaty between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain. And in October of last year, she led a delegation of Israeli officials, business people, and entrepreneurs that visited the two Gulf states to pursue cooperation in various areas: technology, business, and tourism. She organized an inaugural meeting of the Gulf Israel Women's Forum, a group of Emirati and Israeli women that serves as a division of the UAE Israel Business Council. She's an advocate for marginalized populations in Israel, including Haredi women, immigrants, and Ethiopians, and for evening out spending amongst all of Jerusalem's populations. She's spoken publicly on developing Jerusalem as a technology hub, on transportation and mobility issues, budgetary efficiency, good governance, and on the rights of cancer patients. She is, as I say, a name to watch, and her younger sister, Marlena Hassan, is a Gibraltarian member of parliament and a leader of the Together Gibraltar Party. We're not going to discuss Brexit and its ramifications on Gibraltar. Fleur, thank you so much for joining us, and please share with us your reflections now around Yerushalayim and our capital and its future. Welcome this evening.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. It's so wonderful to speak to your wonderful community. I want to say hi to my friend Dalia Hadjo from the ZF. They've done such a great job today in organizing that incredible demonstration, peaceful protest. This is the Jewish community at its best. And this Jewish community has done so much against anti-Semitism in the last few years, fighting the Corbinites, and today, of course, fighting all of the detractors and haters of Israel. I'm also very happy that I've got some family on the Zoom. My cousin Mazel, whose husband is the Gabbai of Kinlos, and my auntie Dinah, who's also I can see on the Zoom. So it's wonderful to be here with all of you. And yeah, it's been a tough 3 weeks in Jerusalem, actually. The trouble started before the rockets started landing everywhere else in Israel. Since the beginning of Ramadan, we've had a deliberate attempt by Hamas operatives living in Jerusalem, and they're not a majority, to cause trouble. And people should really understand that some people think that this was a spontaneous uprising from people being annoyed about certain things. And I'm here to tell you that there's nothing further from the truth. This has been planned by Hamas for a few months, deliberately orchestrated every single move in order to make a linkage between themselves and Jerusalem. Because the minute they link themselves to Jerusalem, then they have spiritual justification to do whatever the hell they want in the Muslim world. And so how do you do that? You start talking about Temple Mount, you make problems in Temple Mount, you send the first rocket to Jerusalem, there you go. Now you have your linkage, you call yourself the Al-Aqsa, whatever, and now you have your linkage. And now you have the justification from the entire Muslim world to continue to attack Israel. But there's three main reasons that I believe, and today actually, I wrote an article about this 2 weeks ago, and today it was confirmed by Hamas itself. I believe this happened for three reasons. The first, and all the reasons revolve around Israel normalizing with the Arab countries around the world, and Israel normalizing with its own Arab community within Israel. So the first reason is the Abraham Accords. As you know, the Abraham Accords is not even a year old. The Gulf countries extending out its hand in friendship to Israel, and Israel normalizing for the first time in history being a regional partner in our region with the Gulf countries that we have a lot in common with. The UAE and Bahrain are very advanced economies like Israel. They're very diverse communities like Israel. And the Abraham Accords have been game-changing for Israel, not just, of course, in terms of business, not just, of course, in terms of a united front against our common enemies, Iran and other Muslim Brotherhood countries, but mainly psychologically, being accepted by the Arab world has been a huge, huge step forward for Israel in its history. And of course, Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood don't like that. The second reason is, of course, that Arab Israelis, for the first time, there's one Arab party that has shown an interest in joining the governing coalition. In fact, it holds the balance of power in Israel. Both parties, both sides want the Ram party with the head Mansour Abbas. And that is something that nobody ever imagined would happen, that an Arab party of four holds a balance of power in Israel, and the right-wing and left-wing parties alike are prepared to create a coalition with them. And that the Ram party itself is kind of like a light incarnation of the Muslim Brotherhood. And so that is very problematic for the Muslim Brotherhood and for Hamas. They don't want to see the Arabs integrating into Israel. They don't want to see, normalization within Israel. And the third reason is about the work that we've been doing in Jerusalem for the last 5 years. We've been, again, building bridges between East and West Jerusalem, building parks, high-tech parks, commercial centers, new schools. It's a different, what we have today between in Jerusalem is a much more advanced city that is reaching out to its Arab population, which is 40% of our city, our Arab population. And the Arabs don't want to be under the Palestinian Authority anymore. They've had enough. They get nothing from them except headaches and pressure. The city takes care of all their needs, and the Arab population are beginning to wake up and say, well, we don't want to be under the Palestinian Authority. They bring us nothing. They're corrupt, and we have zero freedoms. With Israel, we have healthcare, social security, education, anything we need. And so these are the three main reasons that Hamas decided to start this fight, because the Israeli-Palestinian, the welfare of the Palestinian people was very low on everybody's agenda, because people were just getting on with it. The Arabs of Israel were getting on with it. The Arabs of the regions were getting on with it. And even the Arabs in Jerusalem were getting on with it. And so they needed to do something to create a wedge between Israel and the different Arab populations that we have relationships with. So this is why this happened. Now, you're going to hear that it's because of Sheikh Jarrah and the property dispute going on there. And you're going to hear it's because some barricades that the police put up in Damascus Gate. These are created provocations. I'm not saying these things didn't happen, but they were turned into, they were politicized. A security move was politicized, and a property dispute that has been in the Israeli courts for 40 years, a case of people not paying rent, has been politicized. And of course, you have the consequent, slander of ethnic cleansing and all these types of things that the world media eats up lock, stock, and barrel. And so this is why this has happened. And this is what people want you to believe is the reason why it's happened. But it's a very deliberate attack on Israel. It's a linkage to Jerusalem, and it's basically driving a wedge between Israel being able to normalize with its Arabs inside and its Arabs outside. And so that's the bottom line. In the last few days, we've had relative quiet. And I think that to a certain extent, Israel has managed to restore the deterrence from Gaza attacking Israel. Gaza has been completely destroyed. It's been the most surgical pinpoint war in world history. You're going to hear about big numbers of casualties, but ultimately the majority, 2/3 of the casualties are terrorists. We've killed terrorists. A third, of course, is very unfortunate, the people that the terrorists hide behind. But even that number, that third that have been killed, half of them have been killed by the Palestinian rockets, the Hamas rockets that have landed within the Gaza Strip and not on the other side of the fence. So ultimately, Israel is, in terms of civilian casualties, what we're always extremely upset about has been, in terms of the attack that we've launched on them, has been the smallest civilian casualty in any conflict like this in human history. We have to understand this. And this is something that, of course, a fight we didn't ask for, a fight that we need to win, and we did. And now we have to figure out what we're going to do with Gaza, in the long term. Is it going to be, this is the beginning, destroying the infrastructure and monitoring the rebuilding of Gaza? Or is it having to go in with ground troops at some point and completely getting rid of the Hamas terrorist genocidal regime? So those are questions that we need to ask ourselves. If you'd like, Jeremy, I'd be happy to stop here and answer questions.
Thank you so much. I've just asked Shimon to post into the chat a link from, I think it's French television, where you addressed the human rights report, the Human Rights Watchdog report accusing Israel of apartheid in Jerusalem, and gave a very powerful interview. And I think people should take the opportunity to listen to that when they can. A couple of questions have come through. Do you see, and this is for both you and David, do you see the issues in Israel coming to some resolution where we won't have to worry about future attacks? It's very optimistic.
I'd like to believe so, but I don't think, look, the main problem is that the Palestinians have no real leadership, or certainly have no leadership that is interested in the Palestinian people. So the Fatah, which is supposed to be the most moderate Palestinian leadership, is now divided into at least 3 or 4. Mahmoud Abbas is 85 years old. He's an extremely corrupt leader. Him and his sons have become multi-billionaires from the continuing conflict that they perpetuate themselves. He was supposed to be somebody who rejected violence, but incites people to attack Jews and to attack Israelis. And the reason why his own people don't like him is not even because of that. It's because he's brought them nothing. He's brought them zero economic development. He's brought them zero opportunities. It's mafia-style how do you call it?
Kleptocracy.
Kleptocracy. So all they do is pillage from their own people. And he's extremely unpopular. Now, one of the reasons given for starting this fight or starting the hostilities in Al-Aqsa was because he claims that he canceled the Palestinian elections because Israel didn't let the Jerusalem Arabs vote. And let me just put the record straight. That's a complete lie. He never wanted this election because he knows, and he knew, that he was going to lose and Hamas was going to make huge gains. Just so you can understand, Fatah is so divided that they were running on these elections in 3 separate lists, whereas Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad all banded together on one list, and they call themselves something Al-Aqsa. So it always has to be about Jerusalem and about the Temple Mount, because that's how they get a popular vote. So that's what was planned for the election. And then he used the excuse that Israel hadn't allowed him to let the Arabs vote. So first of all, I have to tell you, I've asked several people, no formal request was put in by Abbas for the Jerusalem Arabs. But more important than that, when you talk about the Jerusalem Arabs who were caught in this kind of bureaucratic obstruction, we're talking about 6,000 people out of 150,000 people that could just walk to the neighboring town next to Jerusalem under the Palestinian Authority and vote there. So it was a complete fallacy. It was a complete lie. Again, used as an excuse not to hold an election that he never wanted. But he promised the EU, he promised the American government, and then he tried to find a way to get out of it. So that was his motivation for the conflict. What he never imagined was that the people that he kind of started inciting into trouble were going to side with Hamas and not him. They thought this was going to be a way to get popular support without having an election, and it bit them in the face, because in the end, all the troubles that started in Jerusalem, all those troublemakers started waving Hamas flags and supporting Hamas. So Mahmoud Abbas started a very dangerous gamble, and it worked against him completely. Now there's no elections in the horizon, but Hamas have managed to make themselves in the Palestinian street as the main leaders, even though they haven't been elected. So do I see at the moment that we can make peace? I'm an optimist. I hope one day we will have peace, but not with the current leadership. The current leadership all has to go. The educational system for the Palestinian children has to change. It's all about incitement, glorification of martyrdom and anti-Semitism. And until the children are not taught to love and not hate, we're never going to have peace with the Palestinians.
Right. Thank you for that. I think all the work on the Abraham Accords and the places that you have visited, and the demonstration that we can have excellent relationships with Arab neighbors, it ought to inspire the people in the Palestinian territories to look up for what they might have, rather than perpetuate hostility and missing more and more opportunities. But that's aspirational. Thank you so much.
But the thing is that it's about priorities. Their priorities, destroying Israel, is bigger than their priority to create a state for their own people, and that's the bottom line.
I think that's very clearly put. David, do you have anything to add to that?
Okay, thanks. So I went on and off, and I'm sorry, Fleur, it disconnected for a few minutes. So I think I got the gist of what you were saying. You describe the situation exactly how it is. If you ask regarding the future, as far as I can see, and what Shimon asked was, what's the feeling here? Well, the feeling here is we're just waiting for the next, we call it Sevev, the next round of war. It's probably within 4 to 5 years, maybe a bit less, maybe a little bit more. In the meantime, we have to start rebuilding area shelters for the Ashkelon and Ashdod. There is no partner to talk to. We have to, you can only make peace with somebody. I think Fleur said it quite clearly. There isn't a partner at the moment. But I just caught the end of what you said. It's also in the education. And the hardest thing I find now is educating our own children. You know, we've got thousands of children in our area, 4 huge high schools. How do we teach them when missiles and rockets are falling all over them? How do we teach them that there is a possibility of coexistence? I mean, I'm, over 50, so I see the world differently, but children don't see it any different. I looked at my Yud Betnikim, children who are finishing school, 18 years old. They have grown up over 20 years, 18 years, with missiles over their heads. They don't know anything else. That is a normal way of life. Are the children affected? Of course they're affected. Do they know they're affected? No. Future is bleak, but I think maybe what the things that the state of Israel has made with the more middle of the road Arab states, that may be the way to find some future. But you've got to realize Israel is fighting the Western war. Israel is fighting Iran in Gaza. It's fighting the Hezbollah, which is Iran, in the north of Israel, and it's fighting and preventing Iran from going into Syria. We are fighting the war of the West. Maybe Western leaders know that, but Western populations who are now so influenced by the rise of Islam are affected.
So let me ask you both a question, just following on from that. And that is, do you feel that the ceasefire came at a right and necessary time? Or do you think, and this is clearly a very controversial question, but do you think the operation should have gone on further in order to diminish the possibility of future attacks?
Well, I'm not a security expert, and I wasn't in the cabinet that made the decision. But I have trust in the leadership of this country in terms of its security apparatus, and I think we must have done enough damage to stop. I was at an event on Friday with the health minister and the deputy health minister, and the deputy health minister spoke, Yoav Kish, and he said, to really get rid of the problem in Gaza, we're going to have to go in ground force. And we weren't going to do that this time. So we destroyed enough in order to prepare ourselves to someday go into the ground. I really don't know. All I can say is that whatever they're saying, we really damaged their infrastructure. We did it precisely, we did it surgically. And I believe what we have to do now to keep the deterrence is not accept one balloon, not one rocket. They send one rocket, they send one balloon, we destroy 4 buildings. If they know the price tag of even one little incursion, they'll think twice. And if we left now, I trust our leadership, but we have to make sure that the price is high for any small incursion. And number 2, we have to reassess how we support Hamas or not support them, as we're the ones that are passing the Qatari money to them every month. And so we have to figure out how we either monitor that money or do it through Egypt and make sure that it goes to humanitarian aid and not tunnels and weapons.
Thanks, Fleur. David?
Personally, knowing the guy who was in charge of the southern commander of the Israeli army, Toledano, who lived on Alumim for a few years, so I have to rely on him. He's also a teacher of Jewish philosophy, or study MA in Jewish philosophy. I'll say something which I know is not easy to say, and believe me, it's not easy. We have a catch-22 situation with our army. We've put such a heavy price on our soldiers that in many ways the army, I think, is beginning to not function as an army. We are frightened of losing soldiers. Wars cannot be implemented as they were the 6-Day War, the 73 War. Within a few days, if we lose a few soldiers, it's all over the internet, it's all over that, and the pressure groups coming, and you have to withdraw straight away. And that frightens the leadership. Having one soldier kidnapped can cause havoc. I mean, we have two dead soldiers in Gaza, which we still haven't managed to get back. And just look at the pressure from the families and from the population to bring them back. It's a catch-22 situation where an army is supposed to be those who go in and we pay a price. I'm not sure Israel is prepared to pay that price anymore. So we stopped where really Israel is, as far as I can see. We can all talk about going into Gaza. We knew in this area there was not going to be any infiltration to Gaza. You know it. We know what it was in Sukkot. We knew what it was this time. We knew it was never going to happen. And we knew there would be a ceasefire. And all I hope is it's not going to be like Sukkot. One day you're working, one day you're at home. Half a day the kids come to school. No, we've got to go home. On, off, on, off. We cannot live like that. Children cannot live like that. It's ridiculous. If we stop to the right time, only time will tell.
Right. Fleur, well, we want to go back to Yerushalayim. Do you see that there is any, what are the strategies, your deputy mayor, what are the strategies to try and harmonize relationships with the local Israeli Arab population and to stop them from being further polarized? Do you think anything can be done to create a sense of peace and settlement? That's probably a bad word to use, but peace and to settle people within the city?
Well, we've been doing very well. For 5 years, we've been building bridges. We've been providing resources. We've been connecting with spiritual leaders, civil society leaders, local community leaders. The mayor has done a great job in bringing down tensions. And I'm a big believer in peace and coexistence through economic development. I was very much in favor of the Trump plan, which spoke about developing an economy, developing areas, commercial areas, getting people good jobs. When people have got prosperity, they're going to be less angry and they're going to be less likely to take up the fights of the radicals. And I believe that Jerusalem has incredible economic potential, and we need to bring in the Arabs into that economic prosperity. And I do believe that that's the solution, but we will continue to do it. We have been doing it for 5 years. Like I said right at the beginning, this is one of the reasons why Hamas started the war. They don't like that. They don't like that Arabs are now working in Israeli malls. They don't like that in my gym, a Zumba class has Arab women, ultra-Orthodox women, and that's life in Jerusalem. Anything else you see is a complete lie. We share public spaces, we're in the same malls, we're in the same cinemas when they're open. That's life in Jerusalem. We work together, and that's something that threatens the radicals. So we need to keep doing that, and we need to embrace young Arab men and women who are in university, in good high-tech jobs, in startup nation jobs. And I believe that's the way to keep building those bridges and keep getting the radicals. The radicals thrive on misery and poverty. So we have to get rid of the misery and the poverty. And we're doing a good job so far.
Thank you. Thank everybody for joining us this evening, particularly, of course, to Fleur and to David. Thank again to Shimon for setting it up. It was lovely to have people from the local community, but also cousins of David and Fleur, Gillises and Onis, and people in Israel participating in this and watching it. We wish you all safety. And also to everybody in the community, please do continue to be vigilant. We're getting indications from CST about the possibility of further demonstrations. Please don't take risks, please be alert, and please do comply with everything that CST and the police encourage us to do in order to stay safe. But particularly to you, Fleur, and to you, David, you should be able to continue to build Israel and build it for our families and your families in peace. And our thoughts are with you and all of you this evening. I wish you shalom, and we look forward to hearing your initiatives and your successes in the economic development and the peace that comes from it on some future occasion. Thank you all very much for joining us, and good evening.